My daughter couldn't afford to fix her broken laptop. I secretly took it to get repaired as a surprise. When I went to collect it, the technician looked scared. "Ma'am, change your locks immediately and go to the police." He showed me the screen. My own daughter was planning to destroy me. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me tell you how I ended up staring at messages that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. It started 3 months ago when Uncle Vernon's life insurance check arrived for $1 million. Yes, you heard that right, $1 million. Not exactly lottery money, but enough to change everything for a widow like me who'd been counting pennies since my husband died 8 years ago. Ashley was 25 and living with me in our small house in Mansfield, Ohio. When I showed her the check, her eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Mom, we're rich! We can move to Los Angeles, get that car you've always wanted, live your dreams," she squealed, actually jumping up and down in our tiny kitchen. But I'd learned something about money in my 52 years on this planet. "Honey, $1 million isn't that much money these days. Better to save it. Earn interest, so we never struggle again like we did after your father passed." Ashley's face fell faster than a lead balloon. She nodded and said she understood, but I could see something calculated in her expression, like she was working out a different plan entirely. The girl had champagne tastes on a beer budget. Always had. Though now I wonder if that disappointment was as genuine as it seemed. Around that same time, I started going to Murphy's coffee shop on Elm Street during my lunch breaks from the elementary school, where I worked as a nurse. That's where I met David Harrison. Tall, dark hair, with just the right amount of gray at the temples, wearing work boots and a flannel shirt that looked expensive but not flashy. "First time I've seen you here," he said one Tuesday, sliding into the booth across from me without asking. Normally, I'd have told him where to go, but something about his smile made me pause. "I could say the same about you," I replied, closing my book. "David Harrison," he said, extending his hand. "Local contractor. And you are?" "Claire Morrison, local school nurse who enjoys eating lunch in peace." He laughed, not the fake laugh men use when they're trying to impress you, but a real one. "Fair enough. But before I leave you to your peace, let me ask you something. What kind of books do you read?" I held up my paperback romance novel, expecting him to make some comment about trashy fiction. Instead, he nodded approvingly. "My grandmother read those, said they reminded her that love could still surprise you, even when you thought you'd figured everything out." And just like that, David Harrison had said exactly the right thing. Over the next few weeks, our coffee shop meetings became regular. He told me about his contracting business, how he'd moved to Ohio from Pennsylvania to start fresh after his divorce. I told him about Ashley, about my job, about how quiet the house felt since my husband passed. What I didn't tell him was about the inheritance. Call it cautious, but I'd learned that money changes how people see you, and I wanted to know if David liked Claire the school nurse, not Claire the widow with a windfall. 3 months into what I was starting to think might actually be a relationship, Ashley's laptop started acting up. The screen would flicker, programs would freeze, and she'd bang on it like that would help. Her 25th birthday was coming up, and I thought getting it fixed would be a nice surprise. "I'll take care of it," I told her when she left for her waitressing job at Denny's that morning. "Consider it an early birthday present." I drove to TechMend on Market Street, the same place that had fixed my computer 2 years ago when I spilled coffee on the keyboard. Jimmy, the owner, was maybe 23, but knew computers like my generation knew rotary phones. "Should be ready tomorrow," he said, taking Ashley's laptop. "Probably just needs a cleanup, and maybe some new software." The next day, I went back to pick it up. Jimmy was standing behind the counter, looking like he'd seen a ghost. When he spotted me walking in, he immediately came around the counter and guided me to a corner where no one else could hear. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need to show you something, but you're not going to like it." My heart started hammering. "What's wrong? Is the computer broken?" "No, ma'am, the computer's fine. It's what I found on it that's the problem." He led me to a workstation in the back and opened Ashley's laptop. I was cleaning up her files when I found these messages. I almost deleted them thinking they were spam, but then I realized what they were. The screen showed Ashley's email, and there it was in black and white. Messages between my daughter and someone identified as D. Harrison, with subject lines like payment schedule, and target information. I grabbed the edge of the desk to steady myself as Jimmy scrolled through the emails. They went back 2 months, right around the time I'd first met David at the coffee shop. Payment upon completion, $50,000, read one message from Ashley. She trusts people too easily. Lonely widow, been alone for 8 years. Inheritance worth 1 Mauers. She mentioned interest in moving to warmer climate. Another message from David. Confirmed coffee shop contact established. Target is receptive to attention. Will proceed with courtship phase. Need more details about her interests, daily routine, emotional vulnerabilities. Ashley had responded with a detailed analysis of my life that read like a FBI profile. She knew I got up at 5:30 every morning, that I missed my husband most on Sunday evenings when we used to watch old movies together, that I was self-conscious about my gray hair but too practical to spend money on coloring it. But it was the final message that made my knees buckle. Once she's emotionally invested, convince her to put inheritance money into fake investment scheme. Standard elderly financial exploitation. She'll never suspect family involvement. Jimmy's voice seemed to come from very far away. Mrs. Morrison, you need to sit down. Should I call someone? That's when I realized I was hyperventilating. My own daughter had hired the man I was falling in love with to seduce and rob me. Every meaningful conversation, every gentle touch, every moment I'd thought we were building something real. It had all been choreographed by Ashley for $50,000. But as I sat in that computer repair shop, staring at the evidence of the most complete betrayal I could imagine, something interesting happened. Instead of falling apart, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pure, cold rage. Not the hot anger that makes you do stupid things, but the calculating fury that makes you dangerous. Jimmy, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, I need you to print all of these emails. Every single one. Yes, ma'am? Should I call the police? I looked at the screen one more time, memorizing David's fake concern and Ashley's casual cruelty. Not yet. First, I'm going to give them exactly what they're asking for. But they had no idea what they'd just unleashed. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my car outside TechMend with 43 pages of printed emails, feeling like I'd discovered my entire life was a lie. Which, I suppose, it was. Ashley, the daughter I'd raised alone after her father died when she was 17. The girl I'd worked double shifts to put through community college. The child who'd cried in my arms when boys broke her heart, who'd called me her best friend just last week. That girl had sold me out for $50,000. I drove home in a daze, the manila envelope of evidence on the passenger seat like a time bomb. Our little house on Maple Street looked exactly the same. Same peeling paint on the shutters. Same flower boxes I'd planted last spring. Same porch where Ashley and I had sat just yesterday planning what to make for dinner. But everything was different now. Ashley wouldn't be home for 3 hours. That gave me time to think, to plan, to figure out how to handle this without completely losing my mind. I made coffee, actual coffee, not the instant stuff I usually drank to save money, and spread the emails across my kitchen table. Reading them in chronological order was like watching a horror movie where you're the victim and you never see it coming. Ashley's first contact with David had been through some kind of online service. Not a dating site, but something much worse. A service that connected con artists with targets. Seeking contractor for elderly financial exploitation, Ashley had written. Target. Recently widowed, inherited 1 Nowlers, emotionally vulnerable, trusting nature. Prefer male contractor 40-50, experienced in romance scams. David had responded within hours with what looked like a resume for breaking hearts. 3 previous projects, all successful, all targeting women over 50 who'd recently inherited money. His specialty was the slow burn, establishing genuine emotional connection before transitioning to financial manipulation. But the detail that made my hands shake was Ashley's description of me. Mother extremely isolated since father's death, craves companionship, but suspicious of gold diggers. Suggest contractor pose as blue-collar worker, avoid appearing wealthy. She responds to protectiveness and genuine interest in her thoughts and opinions. Every conversation David and I had shared, every carefully chosen word, every moment I'd thought he was seeing the real me, Ashley had scripted it all. The kitchen timer went off, reminding me to take my blood pressure medication. Ironic, considering what this discovery was doing to my cardiovascular system. But as I swallowed the pill with a gulp of coffee, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't broken. I was furious. For 8 years, I'd been Claire the grieving widow, Claire the struggling single mother, Claire who needed help. Well, those days were about to end. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Marcus Webb, my husband's old business partner who'd become a lawyer after they sold their construction company. Marcus and I had stayed friendly over the years, mainly because he'd handled my husband's estate and always checked on me around the holidays. "Claire, good to hear from you. How are you holding up?" "Marcus, I need legal advice. How quickly can you meet me somewhere private?" His tone shifted immediately. "What's wrong? Are you in trouble?" "Not me, but someone's about to be." An hour later, I was sitting across from Marcus in a corner booth at Romano's, a restaurant 40 minutes outside of town where I was sure Ashley wouldn't spot us. Marcus listened without interrupting as I explained everything, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just taking notes in his careful lawyer handwriting. When I finished, he sat back and looked at me with something like admiration. "Claire, you know this is conspiracy to commit elder fraud, right? These emails are evidence of a federal crime." "I know, but I want to handle this my way first." "What do you mean?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "They think I'm a helpless old woman who'll hand over her money to the first man who pays attention to her. I want to show them exactly how wrong they are." Marcus's eyebrows went up. "That sounds like you're planning some kind of revenge." "Not revenge. Justice. There's a difference." He studied my face for a long moment. "What do you need from me?" "First, I need you to quietly set up a separate bank account and transfer most of the inheritance money there, something Ashley can't access or even know about. Second, I need you to document everything we discussed today in case this goes to court later. And third," I smiled, and for the first time in months, it felt genuine. "Third, I need you to help me give David and Ashley exactly what they're asking for." Marcus closed his notepad. "Claire, whatever you're planning, be careful. These people have already proven they'll betray family for money. There's no telling how far they might go if they feel cornered. Marcus, they made one critical mistake." "What's that?" "They assumed I'd be easy to destroy because I've been grieving and struggling. But what they forgot is that I survived 8 years as a single mother. Worked my way through nursing school at 42 and kept our family together when my husband was dying of cancer. I'm not fragile. I'm just done being underestimated." As I drove home, I thought about David and Ashley, probably texting each other right now, planning their next move in what they thought was a foolproof scheme. They had no idea that their target had just become their worst nightmare. Tonight, when Ashley came home from work, I'd act exactly like the trusting mother she'd been manipulating. Tomorrow, I'd continue my coffee dates with David, playing the role of the lonely widow falling for his carefully crafted charm. But while they thought they were playing me, I'd be orchestrating the most satisfying downfall imaginable. After all, they'd taught me something valuable in those emails. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's being smarter than the people who think they're smarter than you. And I was about to prove just how smart a supposedly helpless 52-year-old school nurse could be. "Mine." Ashley bounced through the front door at 6:45, still wearing her Denny's uniform and smelling like coffee and pancake syrup. "Mom, how was your day?" she called out, dropping her purse on the kitchen counter exactly like she had every day for the past 3 months. Except now I knew she was checking to see if I'd discovered anything, looking for signs that her perfect plan might be falling apart. "Fine, honey. Oh, I picked up your laptop today. It's on your dresser." I kept my voice light, casual, like I was discussing the weather instead of covering up the fact that I'd just discovered my daughter's plan to destroy my life. Ashley's face lit up with what I used to think was genuine gratitude. Now I recognized it as relief that her communication channel with David was restored. "You're the best, Mom. I've got so much schoolwork to catch up on." Schoolwork. That was rich. According to the emails, Ashley had dropped out of community college 8 months ago and had been lying about it ever since. Another detail I'd missed while trying to be the supportive mother. "How was work?" I asked, setting 2 plates on the table for the dinner I'd already prepared. "Busy. Tips were good, though." She sat down and immediately started talking about difficult customers and kitchen drama, the same routine we'd fallen into months ago. But now I could see it for what it was. A performance designed to maintain the fiction that she was just a struggling young woman trying to make her way in the world. Every detail was calculated. The complaints about money to reinforce why she'd need financial help. The stories about difficult bosses to generate my sympathy. Even the way she'd started asking about my day, showing interest in my life, had been part of gathering intelligence for David. My phone buzzed with a text message. David, right on schedule. Had a great time at coffee today. Would you like to have dinner Friday? I know a quiet place in Ashland. I showed Ashley the message, watching her face carefully. What do you think? Is it too soon to have dinner with him? Ashley's eyes flickered with what I now recognized as calculation. Mom, you deserve to be happy. David seems really nice, and you've been alone for so long. I think you should go. Nice. The man who was planning to steal my inheritance was nice. You don't think I'm being foolish? Dating at my age? Mom, you're only 52. Lots of people find love later in life. Besides, she paused, and I could practically see her deciding how much enthusiasm to show. You've been different since you started talking to him, happier. That part was actually true. I had been happier because I'd thought someone might actually care about me for who I was rather than what I could provide. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. After dinner, Ashley disappeared to her room with her laptop, probably reporting to David about my reaction to his dinner invitation. I cleaned the kitchen slowly, thinking about how many conversations we'd had standing in this exact spot where she'd been gathering information to help him manipulate me. Around 9 p.m., I knocked on her door. Ashley, can we talk for a minute? Sure, Mom. Come in. She was sitting on her bed with the laptop open, probably in the middle of typing another message to David. When I entered, she quickly minimized whatever she'd been working on. I wanted to talk to you about the inheritance money, I said, sitting on the edge of her bed. I've been thinking about what you said about living our dreams. Her attention sharpened immediately. Really? Maybe you were right. Maybe I have been too cautious. I've spent 8 years just surviving, and here I have this opportunity to actually live. Ashley's excitement seemed genuine, which made this conversation even more surreal. What are you thinking? Well, David mentioned that he sometimes invests in real estate projects. Flipping houses, that sort of thing. He said there's good money in it if you know what you're doing. I watched Ashley's face carefully. This was the moment where a loving daughter would express concern about her mother considering a major investment with a man she'd just met. Instead, Ashley lit up like I'd just told her Christmas was coming early. That sounds amazing, Mom. David seems really smart about business stuff. Have you talked to him about it? Not yet. I thought I'd see how dinner goes Friday and maybe bring it up then. But Ashley, if I did something like this, it would be a big risk. What if I lost everything? Ashley reached over and took my hand. Mom, you can't live your whole life being afraid. Sometimes you have to trust people. And I have a really good feeling about David. Of course she did. She was getting $50,000 if he succeeded. You really think I should trust him? I think you should trust yourself. You're a good judge of character. Mom, if David feels right to you, then he probably is. Sitting there listening to my daughter encourage me to trust the man she'd hired to rob me was like living in an alternate universe. But it was also exactly the confirmation I needed. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a mistake. Ashley was actively, enthusiastically participating in my destruction. Thank you, sweetheart. It means a lot to have your support. Always, Mom. I just want you to be happy. As I kissed her goodnight and headed to my own room, I wondered if Ashley had ever loved me at all, or if I'd just been a resource to manage until she could figure out how to access my money. But that was a question for another day. Tonight, I had a dinner date to plan for, and David Harrison was about to discover that the lonely widow he thought he was manipulating had a few surprises of her own. I picked up my phone and typed back, Friday sounds perfect. I'm looking forward to it. Then I added, I have something important I'd like to discuss with you. Because I did. I was going to give David exactly what he was asking for. The question was whether he'd realize it was actually a trap until it was too late. Probably not. After all, according to Ashley's emails, I was just a trusting old woman who was easy to manipulate. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. Friday evening, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, applying lipstick and wondering if this was how undercover agents felt before a dangerous mission. I'd chosen a blue dress that Ashley had always said brought out my eyes, paired with the pearl earrings my husband had given me for our anniversary. I wanted to look like a woman ready to make questionable decisions for love. David arrived exactly on time, wearing a sports jacket over dark jeans and carrying a single white rose. If I hadn't known he was a professional con artist, I might have found the gesture sweet. "You look beautiful." "Claire," he said, offering his arm as we walked to his truck. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." The restaurant in Ashland was exactly what I'd expected. Dim lighting, quiet corners, the kind of place where a woman might feel special enough to ignore her better judgment. David had clearly done this before. Over appetizers, he asked about my week, listening with the kind of focused attention that had originally attracted me to him. He remembered details from previous conversations, asked follow-up questions about things I'd mentioned casually, made me feel like my thoughts and opinions mattered. It was masterfully done. If I hadn't known it was all an act, I would have been completely charmed. "Ashley mentioned you've been thinking about making some changes in your life," he said as our main courses arrived. I nearly choked on my wine. Of course Ashley had coached him on how to bring up the subject. "Did she? What kind of changes?" "She said you might be ready to take some risks. Try new things." "That's admirable, Claire. A lot of people get stuck in routines as they get older." "Well, I have been thinking about that inheritance money from my uncle. Maybe Ashley's right that I've been too conservative with it." David's eyes sharpened slightly, though his expression remained casually interested. "Inheritance money can be a blessing or a curse, depending on how you handle it." "What do you mean?" "A lot of people either stuff it in savings accounts where inflation eats it up, or they blow it on things that don't create lasting value. The smart move is to make it work for you." Here we go, I thought. "So, time for the sales pitch. I've done pretty well with real estate investments over the years," David continued. "Nothing flashy, just buying properties, fixing them up, selling them for a profit. It's steady money if you know what you're doing." "That sounds complicated." "Not really. The hard part is having enough capital to get started. Most people don't have the liquid cash needed to move quickly when good deals come up." I took a sip of wine and tried to look thoughtful. "How much money are we talking about?" "Depends on the project, but the opportunities I'm looking at right now would need someone with at least, maybe 800,000 in available funds." 800,000. Leaving me with just enough inheritance to feel secure while he and Ashley disappeared with the bulk of it. They'd even calculated how much to leave me so I wouldn't immediately panic about being wiped out. "That's a lot of money, David." "It is. But Claire, can I be honest with you about something?" I nodded, preparing for whatever manipulation tactic came next. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately. About us. I know we haven't known each other long, but there's something here, isn't there? Something real?" If I hadn't read the emails, I might have melted right there in my chair. David was looking at me with such apparent sincerity, such warmth, that it was easy to see how women fell for this act. "I think so," I said softly. "The thing is, I've been burned before. My ex-wife, she wasn't interested in building anything together. She wanted the benefits of my hard work without contributing anything herself. So when I meet someone like you, someone with intelligence and resources of her own, it feels like maybe we could be real partners." Partners. That was the hook. Not just romance, but partnership. A woman my age, after 8 years alone, would be desperate for someone to share decisions with, to feel like part of a team again. Partners how? In everything. Life, maybe business, if the right opportunity came along. "Claire, I don't need your money. I've done fine on my own. But if we were going to build something together," he let the sentence hang there, letting me draw my own conclusions. Brilliant, really. He wasn't asking for anything. He was just planting the idea that combining our resources might be something a couple in love would naturally do. "The property deals you mentioned, would there be room for a partner?" David smiled like I'd just suggested exactly what he'd been hoping for. "Actually, yes. I've been looking at a development project outside Columbus. Buying distressed properties, renovating them, selling them to young families. It's the kind of thing that requires more capital than I have access to, but the profit potential is substantial." "How substantial?" "Conservative estimate? A return of 30 to 40% within 18 months. I tried to look impressed rather than disgusted by his audacity. That sounds almost too good to be true. I know it does. That's why most people miss opportunities like this. They assume anything that profitable must be a scam. The irony was so thick, I could have cut it with my fork. Would you want to show me these properties? I mean, if I was seriously considering something like this? Absolutely. In fact, there's a deadline coming up. The seller needs a commitment by next Friday, or he's moving on to other buyers. Of course there was a deadline. There always was in cons like this. Create urgency so the mark doesn't have time to think or ask too many questions. Next Friday? That's awfully fast. David reached across the table and covered my hand with his. Claire, I understand if you need more time. This is a big decision, and I don't want you to feel pressured. But I also don't want you to miss out on something that could change your life. Our life, he probably meant to say. After all, we were partners now. Let me think about it over the weekend, I said. Maybe we could drive out and look at the properties Monday? Perfect. I think you're going to be excited when you see the potential. As David drove me home, chattering about renovation costs and market trends, I thought about how Ashley was probably sitting in her room right now, updating him via text about my mood and reactions. Maybe even giving him real-time coaching on what to say next. When we pulled into my driveway, David walked me to the door like a perfect gentleman. I had a wonderful time tonight, Claire. So did I. He leaned in for what I assumed would be a goodnight kiss, and for a split second, I almost pulled away. But then I remembered that I was still playing the role of the unsuspecting widow, so I let it happen. It was a good kiss, I had to admit. David certainly knew what he was doing. I'll call you tomorrow, he said. Maybe we can start looking at some preliminary numbers for the investment. I'd like that. As I watched him drive away, I wondered how many other women had stood in their doorways, feeling like they'd just met their future, not realizing they'd actually just met their destroyer. But David and Ashley had made one crucial miscalculation. They assumed that being lonely and trusting made me stupid. Monday, when we drove out to look at those properties, they were going to discover just how wrong they were, because I had a few surprises planned that weren't in any of Ashley's coaching emails. Saturday morning, I woke up to the smell of bacon and coffee. Ashley was making breakfast, humming while she cooked, looking happier than I'd seen her in months. "Morning, Mom. How was your date?" "Wonderful," I said, accepting the plate she handed me. "David's really something special. I can tell. You're practically glowing." If only she knew what I was really glowing about. It wasn't romance, it was the anticipation of justice. "Ashley, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think I'm being smart about this?" "Dating David, I mean. Sometimes I worry that I'm just lonely and making bad decisions because of it." Ashley sat down across from me with her own plate, looking every inch the concerned daughter. "Mom, you're one of the smartest people I know. You raised me alone, worked your way through nursing school, kept our family together when Dad was sick. Why would you suddenly become stupid about men?" "Because my own daughter taught me to be," I thought, but didn't say. "I just don't want to be one of those women who gets taken advantage of by some smooth-talking man." David doesn't seem like that kind of guy at all. He's got his own business, his own money. What would he want from you except companionship? The question hung in the air between us. Ashley asked it with such apparent innocence that for a moment I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe there was some explanation for those emails that didn't involve my daughter selling me out. Then I remembered the details, the way David knew exactly which topics would interest me, how he'd mentioned specific things about my routine that I'd never told him, the careful way he'd brought up the investment opportunity, making it seem like it was my idea. "You're probably right," I said. "I'm overthinking things. You deserve to be happy. Mom, after everything you've been through, you deserve someone who treats you well." After breakfast, Ashley disappeared to study at the library, which I now knew meant meeting David to coordinate their next move. That gave me the perfect opportunity to drive to Marcus's office and update him on last night's dinner. "So he's going for the classic romance scam," Marcus said after I'd filled him in. "Establish emotional connection, introduce investment opportunity, create urgency. The timeline is accelerating. He wants an answer by next Friday. That's sooner than I expected. Are you sure you want to go through with this? We have enough evidence to involve law enforcement right now." I'd been thinking about that all morning. Marcus, if we call the police now, what happens? Best case scenario? David gets arrested for attempted fraud. Ashley probably faces charges as an accomplice. Probably? The evidence is strong but not ironclad. A good lawyer might argue that the emails were taken out of context, that there was no actual fraud since no money changed hands. And David? He's clearly a professional. His lawyer would claim it was all a misunderstanding, that he genuinely cared about you, and the investment opportunity was legitimate. I thought about that for a moment. So they might walk away with nothing more than legal fees and embarrassment. It's possible. The justice system doesn't always deliver justice, Claire. Then we stick with the plan. But I want you to make some changes to the setup. For the next hour, Marcus and I refined the details of what we were calling Operation Turnabout. By the time I left his office, I felt like a general preparing for battle rather than a victim preparing to be scammed. Monday morning came gray and drizzly, perfect weather for looking at distressed properties. David picked me up at 10 a.m. sharp, wearing work clothes and carrying a clipboard like he was conducting legitimate business. "Ready to see your future?" he asked, kissing my cheek as I got into his truck. "I'm nervous," I said, which was actually true. Not about the fake investment, but about pulling off my own performance. That's normal. Big decisions should make you nervous. It means you're taking them seriously. The first property was a 2-story house in a neighborhood that had seen better days. David walked me through it like a professional contractor, pointing out structural issues that would need to be addressed, discussing renovation costs and timeline. It was impressive, actually. If he wasn't a con artist, he'd probably make a decent contractor. "The seller is asking $200,000, he said, as we stood in what used to be the living room. "I figure we'd need another $100,000 in renovations, maybe $150 if we really want to maximize the profit. And we could sell it for how much? Comparable houses in this neighborhood, after renovation, are going for $450,000 to $500,000. So we're looking at a profit of around $200,000 on this property alone. That's incredible. And this is just one of 6 properties in the package deal. 6 properties. The numbers were getting bigger, which meant the hook was getting deeper. We spent 3 hours looking at houses, crunching numbers, discussing renovation timelines. David knew his business. I'd give him that. If any of it had been real, it might have been a solid investment. But the tell was in the details he couldn't fake. When I asked about permits and inspections, he was vague. When I inquired about title searches and legal documentation, he deflected to discussions about profit potential. When I mentioned wanting to have the properties appraised independently, he explained why that would be unnecessary given the seller's timeline. Classic con artist behavior. Rush the mark past the practical details and focus on the emotional appeal of the opportunity. By the time we finished the tour, David was clearly confident that he had me hooked. We stopped for lunch at a diner outside town, and he pulled out a folder of documents that looked impressively official. "I've prepared a preliminary partnership agreement," he said, sliding papers across the table. "Nothing binding, just outlining how we'd structure the investment and profit sharing." I scanned the documents, noting how they were designed to look legitimate while being completely meaningless. Lots of legal-sounding language that actually committed David to nothing while giving him access to my money. This looks complicated. It always does at first, but it's really just protecting both of us. Your investment is secured by the properties themselves, so there's no risk of losing your money. Except for the part where the properties didn't exist, and my money would disappear into accounts I'd never be able to trace. "David, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why me? I mean, you could probably find investors with a lot more money than I have." For just a second, his mask slipped. I saw him calculating how to answer, probably trying to remember what Ashley had told him about my insecurities. "Claire, this isn't just about the money. Yes, your inheritance gives us the capital we need to make this work. But I want to build something with you. Not just a business partnership, but a life partnership. I've been alone for 3 years since my divorce, and I never thought I'd find someone I could trust with both my heart and my future." It was a beautiful speech, probably the same one he'd given to his previous 3 victims. "I want to do this," I said, meeting his eyes directly. "I want to be partners with you." David's smile was radiant. "Really? Really? When do we start?" "I'll call the seller tonight. Tell him we're ready to move forward. You'll need to have the funds available by Friday for the closing." $800,000? That's right. I know it's a lot of money, but Claire, This is going to change everything for us. As we drove back to my house, David chattering excitedly about our future together, I thought about how Ashley was probably bouncing off the walls right now, counting her $50,000 payday. They both thought they'd won. But what they didn't know was that while they'd been teaching me about deception and betrayal, I'd been learning some lessons of my own, and their education was about to begin in the most unpleasant way possible. Friday couldn't come soon enough. Tuesday morning, I called the bank and asked to speak with Janet Morrison, the investment advisor I'd been working with since I received the inheritance. Janet was maybe 35, whip-smart, and had never once treated me like a confused old lady who needed her financial decisions made for her. "Mrs. Morrison," she said when I arrived for our appointment, "I have to say, this request is highly unusual. I know it is, but I need you to trust me on this. You want to withdraw $800,000 in cashier's checks, but you won't tell me what the investment is? Janet, have I ever made a poor financial decision in the 8 months we've been working together? No, you haven't. You've been extremely conservative, actually, almost too conservative. Then please trust that I know what I'm doing now." Janet studied my face across her desk. "Mrs. Morrison, I have to ask, is someone pressuring you to make this investment? Elderly financial exploitation is more common than people realize." If only she knew how right she was. "No one is pressuring me. This is my decision, and I've thought it through carefully." After another 10 minutes of questioning, Janet reluctantly agreed to prepare the cashier's checks. "But I'm noting in your file that I advised against this transaction." "That's fine." Wednesday afternoon, Ashley came home from her fictitious library study session looking like she'd won the lottery. "How was studying?" I asked, setting dinner on the table. "Productive," she said, practically vibrating with excitement. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said about David's investment opportunity. I really think you should go for it." "You do?" "I've been doing some research on real estate investments, and the numbers he showed you sound really solid." "Research." "Right. More like celebrating with David about how perfectly their plan was working." "I'm glad you think so, because I've decided to do it." Ashley's face lit up like 4th of July fireworks. "Really? That's amazing. The closing is Friday afternoon. David says after that, we'll be official business partners." "Mom, I'm so proud of you for taking this chance. You deserve something good in your life." Thursday evening, David took me to dinner again, this time at an even nicer restaurant. He was clearly feeling confident about the next day's transaction. "Are you nervous?" he asked, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "A little. It's a lot of money." "I know it is. But Claire, by this time next year, you're going to be so glad you took this leap. What happens after tomorrow? I mean, once the money is transferred? We get to work. I'll handle the day-to-day operations, dealing with contractors, overseeing renovations, managing the business side. You'll be a silent partner, collecting your share of the profits." Silent partner. In other words, I'd hand over my money and then have no say in how it was used. "And us? Our relationship?" David's smile was warm and apparently sincere. "Claire, tomorrow isn't just about business. It's about committing to building a future together. Once we're partners in this investment, I want to start planning the rest of our lives too." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe it's time we started talking about moving in together, combining our lives completely." The audacity was breathtaking. He was planning to take my money and then move into my house so he could have complete access to whatever was left. "That sounds wonderful," I said, playing my part. "I'd like that very much." Friday morning dawned bright and clear, like the universe was highlighting the irony of what was about to happen. Ashley made pancakes for breakfast, chattering about how exciting it was that I was taking such a big step. "When will you know if the investment went through?" she asked. "David said we'd know by tonight. The paperwork takes most of the day. And then you'll be business partners, among other things." Ashley hugged me before leaving for her fake job. "I love you, Mom. I'm so happy for you." I hugged her back, wondering if this would be the last time she'd voluntarily touch me. David arrived at 2 p.m. sharp to pick me up for the closing. I had the cashier's checks in my purse, along with a few other documents he didn't know about. "Ready to change our lives?" he asked, kissing me hello. I've never been more ready for anything. The closing was at a title company 40 minutes away, in a part of town I wasn't familiar with. As we drove, David chatted about renovation schedules and profit projections, clearly savoring his approaching victory. The building looked professional enough from the outside, but when we walked into the office, I noticed details that David probably hoped I'd miss. The furniture was generic rental stuff. The woman behind the desk looked nervous. The paperwork was staged on the conference table like props in a play. But I played my part perfectly, asking exactly the kinds of questions a trusting investor would ask while studiously avoiding the ones that would expose the fraud. "Everything looks in order," the fake title agent said after we'd spent an hour reviewing meaningless documents. "All we need is the investment funds." I opened my purse and pulled out the cashier's checks, setting them on the table. David's eyes locked onto them like a predator watching prey. $800,000, I said. "Our future together." "Mrs. Morrison," the woman said, "I just need you to sign here indicating that you're transferring these funds voluntarily." I picked up the pen, paused for a moment as if having second thoughts, then signed my name with a flourish. David was practically glowing with triumph. "Claire, you won't regret this." "Oh, I'm sure I won't." The woman gathered up the checks and the signed paperwork. "We'll process everything this afternoon. You should receive confirmation that the funds have been transferred by 6 p.m. As we walked back to David's truck, he was more animated than I'd ever seen him. "I can't believe we actually did it. We're really partners now." "Yes, we are." "David, can I ask you something? When did you first know you wanted to ask me to invest?" He considered the question, probably trying to remember what story he was supposed to tell. "I think it was during our second coffee date. You mentioned being concerned about your financial future, and I realized I might be able to help." "Interesting." According to Ashley's emails, he'd been planning the investment pitch since before our first meeting. "I want to celebrate tonight," I said. "Maybe you could come over for dinner. I'll cook." "I'd love that. Around 7? "Perfect. And David, invite Ashley to join us. I want the three of us to celebrate together." David's smile flickered for just a second. "Ashley? My daughter. The woman whose advice convinced me to trust you." I was looking forward to that dinner more than David could possibly imagine, because it was going to be the last meal they ever shared as co-conspirators. At 6:47 p.m., my phone rang. David's name lit up the screen, and I could practically hear the excitement in his voice before I even answered. "Claire, the transfer went through perfectly. We're officially partners." "That's wonderful news," I said, stirring the sauce for the pasta dinner I'd prepared. "I can't wait to celebrate. I'm bringing champagne. We've got a lot to toast tonight." Yes, we certainly did. Ashley arrived home at 6:55, still wearing her Denny's uniform, but moving with barely contained energy. She hugged me tighter than usual, and I wondered if it was guilt or excitement driving the extra affection. "How did everything go today?" she asked. "Perfectly. David will be here in a few minutes to celebrate." "This is so exciting, Mom. You're going to be rich." If only she knew how right she was. David arrived exactly at 7, carrying a bottle of expensive champagne and wearing a suit instead of his usual casual clothes. He looked like a man who'd just pulled off the crime of the century, which I supposed he thought he had. "Ashley," he said, when he saw my daughter, embracing her like an old friend. "Your mom told me you encouraged her to take this investment opportunity." "That's quite a daughter you have there, Claire." Ashley beamed at the praise. "I just want Mom to be happy." We sat down to dinner like any normal family celebrating good news. David opened the champagne and proposed a toast. "To new partnerships," he said, raising his glass, "and to the courage to take chances on the future." "To trust," I added, clinking my glass against his. "And to getting exactly what you deserve." Throughout dinner, David regaled us with stories about his previous real estate successes, probably none of them true. Ashley hung on his every word, asking intelligent questions and making supportive comments. They played their parts beautifully. If I hadn't known better, I might have thought David actually cared about me, and Ashley was genuinely happy for my good fortune. Around 8:30, as I was serving dessert, my phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. "Excuse me," I said, stepping into the kitchen to answer. "Marcus, is everything ready?" "Everything's in place." "Are you sure about the timing?" "Perfect timing. Give me 2 minutes." I returned to the dining room, where David and Ashley were chatting quietly. They looked up expectantly when I rejoined them. "That was my lawyer," I said. He had some news about the investment. David's face changed instantly. Your lawyer? Why would your lawyer be calling about our investment? Because I asked him to look into it. David, I hope you don't mind, but before I committed $800,000, I wanted some legal advice. The color drained from David's face. Ashley looked confused, glancing between us like she was missing something important. What kind of legal advice? David asked carefully. Well, Marcus ran background checks on the title company, verified the property ownership records, that sort of thing. Standard due diligence for any major investment. David was gripping his champagne glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. And what did he find? Some very interesting information. For instance, did you know that the title company we went to today doesn't actually exist? The business license is fake, the office is rented under an assumed name, and the woman who processed our paperwork isn't a licensed title agent. Ashley's face went pale. Mom, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that your boyfriend here just stole $800,000 from me. David stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. Claire, I think there's been some misunderstanding. Let me make some calls, figure out what went wrong. Sit down. David. Something in my voice must have warned him because he slowly sank back into his chair. There's no misunderstanding. You see, I've known about your little scheme for almost a week now. Ashley found her voice. Mom, what scheme? I don't understand what's happening. I walked to the kitchen counter and returned with the manila envelope I'd picked up from TechMen 6 days ago. Maybe these will help clarify things. I dumped the 43 pages of printed emails onto the dining room table. Ashley's face went white as she recognized her own words staring back at her. You know, Ashley, I always wondered how David knew so much about me, how he seemed to understand exactly what I needed to hear, how he knew which emotional buttons to push. It's amazing what a daughter can teach a con artist about her own mother. David was staring at the emails like they were evidence at his own murder trial, which, in a way, they were. Payment upon completion, $50,000, I read aloud from one of Ashley's messages. Target is receptive to attention. We'll proceed with courtship phase. Ashley's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. Mom, I can explain. Can you? Can you explain why you sold me out for $50,000? Can you explain why you helped a stranger plan to destroy my life? It wasn't supposed to hurt you, Ashley whispered. David said the investment was real, that you'd make money. David said a lot of things, most of them lies. David finally found his voice. Claire, let's all just calm down and discuss this rationally. Oh, we're going to discuss it. But first, let me tell you what really happened to your $800,000. I pulled out my phone and showed them a bank statement. You see, the cashier's checks I gave you today were real. $800,000 was actually transferred, but not to your fake investment account. David leaned forward, studying the screen. Where did it go? To the Ohio Attorney General's office, specifically to their Elder Fraud Task Force. Along with copies of all these emails, recordings of our conversations, and video evidence of today's fraudulent closing. The silence in the room was deafening. You recorded our conversations? David asked. I recorded everything. Every date, every phone call, every loving word you said while planning to rob me. And Ashley, I have 6 days of audio from this house, including some very interesting phone calls you made to David when you thought I was at work. Ashley started crying. Not the pretty tears she used for manipulation, but ugly, desperate sobs. Mom, please, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. A mistake? Ashley, you conspired to commit elder fraud against your own mother. That's not a mistake. That's a crime. David stood up again, this time with purpose. I'm leaving. No, you're not. As if on cue, there was a loud knock at the front door. Through the window, we could see the unmistakable silhouette of police officers. You see, David, I didn't just give the evidence to the Attorney General. I also provided it to local law enforcement. They've been watching this house for the past hour, waiting for my signal. David sank back into his chair, finally understanding that he'd been completely outmaneuvered. The signal being our lovely dinner celebration, I continued, because I wanted both of you to understand exactly what you'd done before you faced the consequences. Ashley was sobbing harder now. Mom, I'm your daughter. You can't do this to me. I looked at her across the table. This young woman I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, who'd repaid me by selling me to a predator. You stopped being my daughter the moment you decided I was worth $50,000. The knocking at the door became more insistent. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to let the officers in. They have some questions for both of you. As I walked toward the front door, I heard David whisper to Ashley, "You said she was easy to manipulate." "I thought she was," Ashley whispered back. I paused at the door, looking back at them one last time. "The thing about underestimating people," I said, "is that eventually they'll surprise you." Then I opened the door and watched Justice walk into my home. Detective Sarah Martinez was exactly what I'd hoped for when I'd requested a female investigator. Professional, thorough, and completely unsympathetic to sob stories from pretty criminals. "Mrs. Morrison," she said as two other officers read David and Ashley their rights, "we'll need you to come to the station to give a formal statement." "Of course. Should I follow you there?" "Actually, we'd prefer if you rode with us. This is now an active crime scene, and we'll need to process it." I gathered my purse and the spare copies of evidence I'd prepared, watching as David and Ashley were led to separate police cars. Ashley turned back to look at me one last time, her face streaked with tears and mascara. "Mom, please don't do this. I'm sorry." I met her gaze steadily. "I'm sorry too, Ashley. Sorry that I raised a daughter who thought love was for sale." At the police station, I spent 3 hours walking Detective Martinez through the entire timeline, from the moment I discovered the emails to tonight's dinner confession. She recorded everything, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just listening with the focused attention of someone building an airtight case. "Mrs. Morrison, I have to say, this is one of the most thorough evidence packages I've ever seen. You documented everything. I had a good teacher. My husband always said that if something was worth doing, it was worth doing right. The recordings you made are particularly damaging. In Ohio, you only need one-party consent for audio recordings, so everything you captured is admissible. What happens now? David Harrison is looking at multiple felony charges: conspiracy to commit elder fraud, wire fraud, identity theft. With his apparent history of similar crimes, he's probably facing 8 to 10 years. And Ashley? Detective Martinez's expression softened slightly. Your daughter is looking at conspiracy charges as well. As a first-time offender, she might get off with probation and restitution. But that depends on the prosecutor and the judge. I thought about that for a moment. Detective, I want to make something clear. I'm not looking for revenge against Ashley. I'm looking for justice. If she can genuinely acknowledge what she did and make amends, I'm open to discussing alternatives to prosecution. That's very generous of you, considering what she put you through. She's still my daughter, but I won't be manipulated by guilt or family obligation anymore. If she wants forgiveness, she'll have to earn it. It was nearly midnight when Marcus picked me up from the police station. We drove through the quiet streets of Mansfield in comfortable silence for a few minutes before he spoke. "How do you feel?" "Tired, sad, but also," I paused, searching for the right word, "powerful. For the first time in years, I feel like I have control over my own life. You handled this brilliantly, Claire. The way you turned their own plan against them was inspired. I had advantages they didn't count on. They assumed I was isolated, that I didn't have resources or people who cared about me. They were wrong on both counts." Marcus pulled into my driveway, and I looked at my house with new eyes. 3 hours ago, it had been the scene of the most elaborate betrayal I could imagine. Now it was just home again. "What's next?" Marcus asked. "First, I need to change all my locks and security codes. Then I need to figure out how to rebuild my life without Ashley in it. That's going to be the hardest part." I thought about that as I walked up to my front door. The house felt different with Ashley gone. Quieter, but also somehow cleaner. As if removing her presence had eliminated a toxin I hadn't even realized was there. In the kitchen, I cleared away the dinner dishes from our last meal together, probably forever. The champagne David had brought was still sitting on the counter, half full. I poured it down the drain and put the bottle in the recycling bin. Then I walked through the house, looking at family photos that would need to be removed, Ashley's belongings that would need to be packed up, the traces of a relationship that had apparently never been real. My phone rang at 7 a.m. the next morning. Detective Martinez with an update. "Mrs. Morrison, I wanted to let you know that David Harrison has requested to speak with his attorney about a plea deal. He's apparently very interested in avoiding trial. What kind of plea deal? Full confession, restitution of all stolen funds, and information about his previous victims in exchange for a reduced sentence. Previous victims? We ran his fingerprints and discovered that David Harrison isn't his real name. He's actually Michael Chen, wanted in 3 other states for similar schemes. Your case might help us close several outstanding investigations. I thought about those other women, other families destroyed by Michael's lies. What about the money? Can it be recovered? That's the interesting part. The account where your funds were transferred? It was actually controlled by the Attorney General's office. We've been tracking this type of fraud for months, and your cooperation allowed us to set up a sting operation. So the $800,000 is completely safe. In fact, it's earned about $300 in interest while sitting in the state account. I started laughing, which probably sounded a little hysterical. So, I actually made money on this investment? In a manner of speaking, yes. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee and thinking about the irony. David's plan had been to steal my inheritance and disappear. Instead, he'd walked straight into a trap that would send him to prison and help law enforcement catch other predators like him. Sometimes justice had a sense of humor. My doorbell rang around noon. Through the window, I could see a young woman I didn't recognize, well-dressed and carrying a briefcase. Mrs. Morrison, I'm Jennifer Walsh, Ashley's court-appointed attorney. I was hoping we could talk. I invited her in, curious about what Ashley's legal strategy might be. Mrs. Morrison, Ashley asked me to convey her apologies for everything that happened. She wants you to know that she never meant for things to go as far as they did. How far did she mean for them to go? Jennifer looked uncomfortable. She claims she thought the investment opportunity was legitimate, that she was just introducing you to someone who could help you make money. Ms. Walsh, I have recordings of Ashley coaching David on my emotional vulnerabilities, my daily routine, and the specific phrases that would manipulate me most effectively. Those aren't the actions of someone who thought she was helping. I understand your anger. It's not anger anymore. It's clarity. For 25 years, I prioritized Ashley's needs over my own. I sacrificed my education, my career opportunities, my social life to be the mother I thought she needed. This is how she repaid me. Jennifer opened her briefcase and pulled out a document. Ashley has written you a letter. She asked me to give it to you personally. I took the letter but didn't open it. What does she want? She's hoping you'll consider allowing her to plead to a misdemeanor with community service instead of the felony charges. She's also asking if you'd be willing to testify as a character witness. I looked at Jennifer for a long moment. Ms. Walsh, your client helped a career criminal plan to destroy her own mother's life for money. What character exactly would I be witnessing to? She's very young, and she made a terrible mistake. She's 25 years old. That's old enough to understand the difference between right and wrong. After Jennifer left, I sat on my couch holding Ashley's unopened letter. Part of me wanted to read it, to see if she'd finally found the honesty that had been missing from our relationship for months. But another part of me knew that anything Ashley wrote now would be designed to manipulate my emotions and save herself from consequences. I'd already fallen for that trick once. Instead, I put the letter in my desk drawer, unopened. Maybe someday I'd be ready to hear Ashley's excuses and justifications, but not today. Today, I had a life to rebuild, and for the first time in years, I was going to build it entirely on my own terms. 2 weeks after Ashley's arrest, I received a call that changed everything I thought I knew about this story. Mrs. Morrison, this is Detective Robert Thompson with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I need to speak with you about your daughter and Michael Chen, also known as David Harrison. The FBI? Yes, ma'am. What happened to you is part of a much larger investigation. Can we meet today? An hour later, I was sitting across from Detective Thompson in a coffee shop, the same coffee shop where I'd first met David. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mrs. Morrison, how much did you know about Ashley's financial situation before this incident? I knew she was struggling, working at Denny's, taking community college classes. Why? Detective Thompson opened a folder thick with documents. Ashley wasn't taking classes. She dropped out 8 months ago, and her financial situation wasn't struggling. It was desperate. He slid a bank statement across the table. Gambling debts. $67,000 owed to some very dangerous people. I stared at the numbers, trying to process what I was seeing. Gambling debts. Online poker, sports betting, casino debts in 3 different states. Ashley was in serious trouble, the kind that gets people hurt if they don't pay up quickly. But she never said anything about gambling, because she was in over her head and terrified. Mrs. Morrison, Ashley didn't contact Michael Chen to steal your inheritance for spending money. She contacted him because she was afraid for her life. The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too crowded. That doesn't excuse what she did. No, it doesn't. But it explains it, and it changes the legal situation considerably. Detective Thompson pulled out another document. Michael Chen isn't just a romance scammer. He runs a sophisticated criminal organization that preys on desperate people, forcing them to target their own families. Ashley wasn't his partner. She was his victim, too. I thought back to all those conversations Ashley and I had shared, the way she'd encouraged me to trust David, the enthusiasm she'd shown for the investment opportunity. Had any of it been real, or had she been acting under threat? How does this work? This criminal organization? Chen identifies people in desperate financial situations, usually through online gambling sites or loan companies. He offers to help them solve their money problems in exchange for access to wealthy family members. If they refuse or try to back out, he threatens violence. Detective Thompson showed me photographs of bruises on a young woman's arms and face. This is Chen's previous partner in Michigan. When she tried to back out of targeting her grandmother, Chen's associates made sure she understood the consequences of non-cooperation. My hands were shaking as I set down my coffee cup. Are you saying Ashley was being threatened? We found text messages on her phone, Mrs. Morrison. Chen had photos of Ashley entering and leaving the house, your work schedule, even pictures of you at the grocery store. He made it clear that if she didn't cooperate, both of you would be hurt. The world seemed to shift around me. Everything I thought I understood about Ashley's betrayal was suddenly more complicated. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she ask for help? Because Chen is very good at psychological manipulation. He convinced Ashley that you'd be safer if you didn't know, that the plan would work without anyone getting hurt, and that if she involved you or law enforcement, he'd disappear and send someone else to collect her debt through violence. I thought about Ashley's behavior over the past few months. Details I'd attributed to guilt about the conspiracy, the way she jumped whenever her phone rang, how she'd started checking the locks on doors and windows obsessively, the dark circles under her eyes that I'd assumed were from staying up late studying. So when I discovered the emails, Ashley panicked. She knew that if the plan fell apart, Chen would blame her. That's why she was so upset when you showed her the evidence. Not because she was caught, but because she knew what Chen would do to both of you if he thought she'd betrayed him. Detective Thompson leaned forward. Mrs. Morrison, your decision to involve law enforcement and set up that sting operation probably saved both your lives. Chen was planning to disappear with your money, but he was also planning to eliminate the witnesses who could identify him. The coffee in my stomach turned to acid. He was going to kill us? Chen's organization has been linked to 3 unsolved murders in other states, all family members of people who'd been coerced into targeting their relatives. We think he considers loose ends to be unacceptable risks. I sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile this new information with everything I thought I knew about the past month. Where does this leave Ashley legally? That depends partly on you. The prosecutor is willing to consider a plea agreement that takes into account her coercion, but only if you're willing to support it. What kind of plea agreement? Testimony against Chen and his organization in exchange for probation and mandatory counseling for gambling addiction. She'd also be required to make financial restitution for any money you lost. Though obviously, that's not an issue in this case. I thought about Ashley sitting in a jail cell right now, probably terrified about what would happen to her, maybe even worried about my safety. All this time, I'd assumed she was just a greedy young woman who'd betrayed me for money. But if she'd been trapped by gambling debts and threatened with violence, can I see her? That can be arranged. But Mrs. Morrison, I need you to understand something. Even if Ashley was coerced, she still made choices that put you in danger. Whatever you decide about forgiveness or legal consequences, make sure you're protecting yourself first. That evening, I drove to the county jail for my first visit with Ashley since her arrest. She looked terrible, pale, thin, with the kind of exhaustion that comes from weeks of fear and guilt. "Mom," she said through the glass partition, her voice barely audible through the phone. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry about everything. Ashley, I know about the gambling debts. I know about Michael Chen's threats." Her face crumpled. "I wanted to tell you, but he said he'd hurt you if I did. He had pictures of you, Mom. He knew where you worked, what time you got home. He said if I didn't help him, he'd find another way to get to you, and it wouldn't be as gentle. Why didn't you just ask me for help with the debts? $67,000? Mom, that's more money than we've ever had, and it would have ruined everything. Your inheritance, your future, your opinion of me. I thought if I could just help Chen get some of the money, pay off the debt, then everything would go back to normal and you'd never have to know." I looked at my daughter through the reinforced glass and saw not the calculating criminal I'd imagined, but a terrified young woman who'd made terrible choices while trying to protect the people she loved. "Ashley, what you did was still wrong. Even if you were threatened, you put me in danger. I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it. The FBI says Chen was planning to kill us both after taking the money." Ashley's face went white. "He said no one would get hurt. He promised. Criminals lie, Ashley. That's what makes them criminals." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us probably thinking about how close we'd come to a very different ending to this story. "What happens now?" Ashley asked. "Now you're going to testify against Chen and help the FBI stop him from doing this to other families. And you're going to get help for your gambling addiction. And us? Is there still an us?" I looked at my daughter, weighing everything I'd learned against everything I'd lost. "I don't know yet, Ashley, but we're both alive, and that's more than we would have been if I hadn't discovered those emails." For the first time in weeks, Ashley smiled. It wasn't much, but it was a start. 6 months later, I stood in a federal courthouse watching Michael Chen get sentenced to 25 years in prison. Ashley sat beside me, thinner but healthier, her hand trembling slightly as the judge read the verdict. "The defendant systematically targeted vulnerable individuals and their families," Judge Williams said, looking directly at Chen. "This organization destroyed lives, stole life savings, and in some cases, committed murder to cover their tracks. The sentence reflects the gravity of these crimes and the need to protect society from individuals who prey on families in crisis." Chen showed no emotion as he was led away in handcuffs. But I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete closure. After the sentencing, Ashley and I walked out of the courthouse together. The FBI investigation had uncovered 12 other families victimized by Chen's organization, with financial losses totaling over $4 million. Ashley's testimony had been crucial in securing convictions against Chen and 6 of his associates. "Mom," Ashley said as we reached my car, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? Really forgive me, not just legally but personally?" I'd been thinking about that question for months, ever since I'd learned the full scope of what had happened to us. "Ashley, I forgave you the day I learned about the threats against our lives. What you did was wrong, but you were trapped in an impossible situation by a professional criminal. But I still betrayed your trust. Yes, you did, and it's going to take time to rebuild that trust. But we have time now, which we wouldn't have had if Chen's plan had succeeded." Ashley nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I've been going to Gamblers Anonymous meetings 3 times a week, and I'm starting community college again in the fall, for real this time." "That's good. How are you paying for it?" "I got a job at the insurance company downtown. Data entry, nothing glamorous, but it's honest work and the pay is decent." We drove home in comfortable silence, something that had taken months to achieve. The house felt different now, lighter somehow. I'd redecorated Ashley's room and converted half of it into a home office where I'd started doing freelance medical consulting work. Having a purpose beyond survival had been crucial to my healing process. "Mom, can I tell you something else?" "Always. When I was planning to help Chen steal from you, I told myself it was just money, that you'd still have enough to be comfortable, and I'd pay you back somehow, and eventually it would all work out. But sitting in that jail cell, I realized something." "What's that?" "It was never about the money. It was about violating your trust and treating you like you were just a resource instead of my mother. That's what I'm really sorry for." I pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine. "Ashley, your father died when you were 17. From that day until this one, every major decision I've made has been about protecting and providing for you. Sometimes I wonder if I protected you so much that you never learned to handle real problems on your own. You think this is your fault? I think we both made mistakes. You made terrible choices when you were in trouble, but I enabled those choices by never teaching you that actions have consequences. So where does that leave us? I looked at our house, the home I'd nearly lost due to my daughter's desperation and a criminal's manipulation. It leaves us with a chance to build a relationship based on honesty instead of dependency. You're 25 years old, Ashley. It's time for both of us to learn who you are when you're not relying on me to solve your problems. That evening, we cooked dinner together for the first time since her arrest. Not the elaborate celebration meal from 6 months ago, but simple comfort food shared by two women who'd survived something terrible together. I saw Marcus at the courthouse, Ashley said as we cleaned up afterward. He said, "You're thinking about traveling?" I am. I've never been anywhere except Ohio and the surrounding states. I thought maybe I'd take that inheritance money and actually see some of the world. Where would you go? Ireland first. Your father always wanted to see Ireland. Then maybe Italy, England, Scotland. All the places we talked about visiting but never could afford. Ashley smiled. That sounds amazing. How long would you be gone? Maybe 6 months. Long enough to figure out who I am when I'm not defined by other people's needs. And when you come back? I thought about that question. When I come back, we'll see where we both are. Maybe we'll both be ready for a different kind of relationship. 3 months later, I boarded a plane to Dublin with 2 suitcases and a sense of adventure I hadn't felt in decades. Ashley drove me to the airport, no longer the scared young woman who'd made desperate choices, but someone who was learning to face her problems head on. Take care of yourself, I told her as we hugged goodbye. Take care of yourself too, Mom. You deserve this. As the plane lifted off, I looked down at Ohio getting smaller below me and thought about everything that had led to this moment. Ashley's betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but it had also forced me to discover strengths I didn't know I possessed. I'd learned to trust my instincts instead of ignoring red flags for the sake of politeness. I'd learned that family relationships require mutual respect, not just unconditional love. Most importantly, I'd learned that at 52, my life was far from over. 6 hours later, I was standing in the Dublin airport, surrounded by accents I'd only heard in movies, holding a map of a city I'd never seen, completely on my own, for the first time in 30 years. It was terrifying and exhilarating and exactly what I needed. My phone buzzed with a text from Ashley. "Safe travels, Mom. Thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to start over." I smiled and put the phone away. She was right about starting over, but she'd gotten one thing wrong. I wasn't starting over. I was finally starting to live, and that was worth more than any inheritance could ever be. If to the end. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming everything your enemies never thought you could be. Sometimes the greatest betrayal leads to the greatest liberation. And sometimes the people who try to destroy you end up giving you exactly what you need